just get a smile on my face every time I hear that. My hat goes off to Peter Trulin, who put that music together for us. Beautifully done, Peter, and thank you so much for that. So in case you don't know what you're listening to, that's the intro music for the Rec Poker Podcast. I'm just pleased as punch to be hosting the show this week. My name's Jim Reed. I'm Bluff Sterini in the home game, Rec Poker Jim on Twitter while we've still got it. And if you don't know what's going on at Rec Poker, we're a group of very enthusiastic and fun-loving poker fans. We like learning together, we play together, we commiserate together, we celebrate together. It's a free organization that everyone can come and sign up for a free account. If you go on over to rec.poker and sign up, all it takes is an email address and a smile, but they are both mandatory. I have to thank our sponsors because most of what we do is free. Like I said, we're a largely volunteer-based organization, and that includes the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. We couldn't do it without them. And I really have to thank our premium members. Their pledge of $15 a month. I know, only $15 for all the amazing material we put out here at Rec Poker for our premium program. It's insane. But come on down to Wacky Jim's House of Poker and drop those $15 off. It makes a huge difference, puts a smile on the face of everyone here on the Wrecking Crew. And I mentioned the Wrecking Crew because they're the real magic makers, the real heroes behind the curtain here at Rec Poker. You get used to hearing my voice because they throw the mic in front of me on Monday nights, but I'm just one of many. I couldn't do it without everyone in the Wrecking Crew. If you want to learn more about me and the Wrecking Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just listen up because we're about to hit you in the ear hole, starting with my main man, Ben Enslow over here.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. As Jim said, Ben Enslow, BJamin on 96 on Twitch. You can find all my socials there. And I'm East Coast Bitter in the home game.
And I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the Poker Stars home game.
And I'm Rob Washam, and you can find me Rabman50 just about everywhere.
And in case you're wondering, folks, that's right. We got him. We got him back in the room. We had so much fun last week talking about multi-way pots with the one and only Rob Gardner that we cast the hook out, reeling him in. We got him in here. We're going to talk about one specific hand in that has to do with multi-way pots. So first of all, Rob, just thanks for coming back to the show, man. We love talking to you about poker.
You never have to reel me in, my friend. I will. I'll slip you a 20 after the it's over for letting me come on here and no, seriously,
he's gonna jump on the boat. He's just jumping right on the boat.
He's jumping right in. We don't even need a net for this guy. Get him in here. Well, you're great. You're a great addition to the crew here. We love talking poker with you, Rob. Now we're not the only people that you talk poker with. You've got a lot of exciting things going on in the world of poker. A revitalization of your streaming. You're sort of thrusting yourself back in the limelight. Why don't you tell our listeners, in case they didn't catch last week, about some exciting stuff that's going on with you these days?
Yeah, so I got approached coming back from the World Series of Poker by two people who wanted to make a big splash in the industry and asked me if I'd be interested in coming back and streaming. And at first I was a little apprehensive about the idea. But after kind of seeing their vision for what they wanted to accomplish and some of the ways they wanted to go about it, they reeled me in too. And the name of the project is 100K Studios. And basically the organization, the company, their goal is to bring 100,000 fresh faces into the game of poker by making the game more entertaining, by making educational poker more accessible, more fun to learn. And the premise is basically that they're kind of I'm going to date myself, but the man behind the green curtain, the old Wizard of Oz, right? And pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. They're kind of staying behind the scenes while they kind of lead me on this poker journey of bettering myself and challenging me to get better at all facets of my game, both on and off the felt. And then in turn, trying to take that out into the world and inspire more people to work on their games, learn more about poker, have fun more playing poker, and hopefully bring a lot of people into the game and have a overall positive impact on kind of the entire poker industry. And so it's a very fun project. It's a very challenging project. And yeah, it's got me back in the content world, doing content, which I always have enjoyed and loved doing. While it's simultaneously continue trying to build my game and grow myself and make myself a better human being in addition to just poker.
That's great. Well, I mean, we talk all the time here about how poker is a great corollary for life. You know, the lessons you learn in one will aid you in the other. So I applaud that mission and that journey you're on, Rob. Where can people find out more about this if they want to, and how can they kind of get more involved with you and the work that you're doing in this area?
Yeah, so January 17th, as you guys are listening to this, you'll be able to check out the website over at 100kstudios.tv. You can also follow me on my Twitch at twitch.tv/pokerpasser. It was my old montage that they had me bring back. And I'm on Twitter at Rob Gardner Live. There will be lots of exciting events and things going on between all three. We'll be doing some free coaching along the way, and we'll be doing some interviews. Might even bring Jim in for an interview at some point, so we might flip the script here a little bit. But yeah, any of those are great avenues to kind of see what's going on and check out the project a little bit more.
Right on. Well, you're an easy guy to get to know. You're an easy guy to get along with. We love talking poker with you, so I hope I'm sure it's going to go really well for you. And you're going to spread the light and help some other people get even more into poker. It's such a great game. It's just I just love talking to people like yourself that want to spread this game as far as we can and share with other people just how easy it is to love, how rewarding it is of some study. And so kudos to that. And I can't wait to shed a little light today on Multiway pots. So Chris Jones is our director of content membership content here at Rec Poker. Every month we have a new theme of the month. The theme in January is Multiway pots. It was limped pots playing against limpers in December. It's going to be sizing in February. And we kind of unroll each theme of the month throughout the month. All our learning material all month is going to be based around this theme. So we had Rob on the show last week. We talked about sort of in abstract what makes multi-way pots different from heads-up pots, some tips, some tricks, some things to avoid. Some general rules. I know all our recreational players enjoy having some general rules to follow and then some exceptions to those rules. We're going to take a look at a specific hand here that Chris brought to the table. Chris, why don't you introduce the hand and tell us a little bit about the circumstances in which it was played and sort of get us started on it so we can start diving right into it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think if you haven't listened to the last week's episode, you should, because I think this is going to really build on some of the things that we talked about, at least, and I also think this is a hand I think we probably find ourselves in a decent amount. And I also think that I absolutely butchered this hand. So be honest and brutal as we go through this. So this is a Sunday ACR $55 tournament. We're kind of in the early-ish stages. We've got an average stack with 60 big blinds to start the hand. And we're in the cutoff, and it folds to us in the cutoff pretty uncontroversially. We open with ace of diamonds, king of spades. That, pretty common, nice hand. The less common thing that happens to us is that everybody calls behind. The button, small blind, and big blind all call. And they are all, the button has about 40 big blinds and the small blind and big blind have about 70. So the two blinds cover us. The button, we cover them. And we're going to a flop with about 10 big blinds in the middle. Any thoughts before I kind of let you know what happens next?
So your sizing what was your sizing pre?
I opened to 2.3.
Okay.
Big blinds. And we got three callers. Any other?
Well, it's pretty mandatory open with ace king. So
yeah. I think the
full marks so far. I think you're playing this hand perfectly.
I nailed it.
Yeah, it seems like you played it really well. All right, nice, good hand. Let's go to the next hand.
Let's go to the next hand.
Yeah, everyone else just folds before the flop comes out, and
they walked away.
They just voluntarily mocked. Yeah.
Okay, flop comes, and I think this is where the part in my head came up where I was like, well, this is a multi-way pot. I got to be more careful. And I think after even listening to last week's episode, I might have even played this hand a little differently. But anyway, the flop comes 7 of spades, 5 of hearts, 3 of clubs. So 7, 5, 3 rainbow. The two blinds check to us. And I decide to check behind as well, thinking that this is a very blind favorable flop. I decide, and because we're multi-way, I just decide that I like my ace king. I'm probably actually pretty good here, but it's not a hand that I'm really feeling all that comfortable kind of betting into these four players with. So I'll stop there, and maybe we can talk about this, whether this should be one of those small bets we talked about last week.
Well, before Rob jumps in, I want to make sure I can get some bad ideas out of the way first, as well. So to me, I'm kind of with you, Chris, because it feels like that player in the big blind is getting such a good price by the time it gets to them that they're probably continuing with a really wide range of hands, and that's going to smack that kind of flop more than even a more conventional big blind calling range would. So I don't think you're wrong to be thinking about all those, one pair plus draw hands that big blind player is going to have, even if we think the in position player and the small blind player are probably coming along a little tighter than that. I don't think that's crazy or wrong, Chris. So I guess the question that last week's episode makes me think about is, how important is it to kind of deny equity to those other two players, and still go into a spot where holding ace king versus a one pair hand isn't actually doing that badly compared to going four ways. So yeah, that's the only thing that really occurred to me off the top. Who else has some ideas here? We're coming right to the big guns, Mr. Gardner. What's your analysis?
I actually love this check, but the reason I love this check is because of the tournament you're playing in, because you're playing in a $55 on ACR. If you were playing in a $10 ACR or a $33 on one of the less popular sites, I think you definitely want to put a small bet out, because there is, again, going to be a small percentage of the time that all three people will fold, believe it or not. Because of this particular tournament, and just because of the level of skill on a 55 on ACR is going to play like a 1K live. It's going to have some good players that are really, really good. It's going to have some bad players that are really, really bad. But there's going to be enough players that are decent that, that type of board, you're going to have players in that game who know that they can check raise that board just because of the range advantage. And you end up betting in a place where, if they're really check raising a proper range, you're supposed to have some defense, and that's going to be extremely hard to do with a hand like ace king high. It also limits your opportunity of getting a check through and maybe hitting an ace or king on turn. So we're for the average game that probably this listener is listening to, I would lean towards just going ahead and putting out a really small, 10 to 15% C bet. In this particular tournament, I would lean heavily towards check here.
All right. Well, so far so good. And our button checks behind. So we go to a turn, and this is where the hand gets a little spicy. Again, we had a 7-3-5 rainbow flop with one club. The three was a club, and the turn is the king of clubs. So now we've got two clubs on the board, 7-3-5. We have hit top pair with top kicker. And it checks, the two blinds check to us. And now we decide that this is a hand that's probably strong enough to bet. So into this about 9.5 big blind pot, I elect to bet 4 big blinds. Could go bigger, could go smaller, could check again. I don't know. Tell me your thoughts here.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, jump in there. Right?
I want to make sure it wasn't gonna. So there's a couple thoughts here. Generally speaking, I think you're going to see weaker players bet a lot of their value hands, and really strong players will check some of their value hands, because strong players will understand the king is a good card for you. and a card that you're going to likely bet a lot, both because you hit it and both because you can represent it. Weak players don't have that comprehension. So again, when you're up against weaker players and they have a strong hand, they're going to bet. When you're up against stronger players, they're going to have more traps. Betting in general in both situations is going to be good because we want to deny our opponents equity or at least charge them a reasonable price. Obviously, the big blind can have a whole ton of combo, pair plus straight draws, potentially some pair plus flush draws, some gut shot straight draws, some open-ended straight draws. So I think checking is probably the worst thing we could do here. In terms of sizing, you can make an argument for like 40 to 80%, kind of depending on the situation. I think a lot of it comes down to what is your decision if you get raised. To me, I don't see a lot of value to betting here and defending a raise, even in a $55 tournament, unless I had a really, really strong read that my opponents were extremely capable. So I'm probably going closer to like 6 big blinds here because I really want to equity price out a lot of the weaker draws. And also we'll just get some calls from like second pair hands that maybe didn't lead flop and then kind of like, I'm stuck on turn because the king came. So I would probably lean towards the bigger side, but I think anything between 40 and 80 is justifiable, especially if you had any reads at all on the table that were kind of influencing your decision.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing you got raised.
Is this a spot where we can go bigger, even like pot or a little over pot? Is this that kind of spot?
Well, yeah, Rob, before you answer that, one of the things that I think we talked about last week, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Rob, but one of the things that kept going off in the back of my head about this is I think if I was heads up, then this would be a spot where I would go. If I was heads up against like the big blind and this king came, I would go much bigger. But because we're multi-way, I think that the thing that I have been, as I've been kind of learning about this, is like that we get to go smaller and kind of leverage the stacks off each other. But I'm curious if that's your read as well, Rob.
Well, again, this is the tricky part, right? Because if we were in a $16 tournament, let's just take it back to that example. The reason we would go way bigger there is because people aren't folding any of their draws. So we might as well get, like, in fact, their range is going to be heavily condensed towards draws because they're going to bet a lot of their value. They're going to bet their 2 pairs. They're going to bet their sets. They're not going to check it a second time. So when they check and now we bet and their calling range comes into play, it's almost exclusively draws. And at that point, when you have a range that's capped to draws, we want to go to value town. We just want to go nuts. This being at 55, it gets a little bit more tricky because now you're kind of balancing your opponent type, right? And not knowing for sure where they're at. We get into more of a mixed strategy. And the danger too is like, if you go too small in this spot, you almost invite check raises. Like, one of the nice advantages of going bigger on this type of board where you do have very good interaction with the big blinds, is it deters some of their check raises, especially at an SPR of, let's see, it was 10 in the pot. It checked around. You're betting 4 into 10. So there's like, you've got like 54 behind effective, right? So going 7 to 8 and them raising to like 20 bigs is kind of pot committing themselves in a lot of ways. There's not going to be a lot of 20 big blind check raise folds. So it's kind of a situation where if you were in a spot where everybody was really good or everybody was really bad, I think it'd be easier to decide. Like, bad, we would just go big exclusively. Good, if everybody was really, really good, we would go small and leverage, but we would also go small leverage, understanding how many check raise bluffs our opponent has. And you would find ace king being almost a pure call in that situation. Whereas in this spot, in a hybrid situation, we're probably not doing a lot of bet calling on check raises because our opponents just aren't perfectly balancing their ranges. So that's where I would kind of, in this particular spot, steer towards a little bit of a bigger sizing, get max value from draws from the bag players, deter the good players from having as wide of a check raising range, and kind of merge those two strategies together.
And maybe now would be a good time to just introduce a little bit of player typing too, as we kind of get into this. The things that I do know is that the big blind is somebody is a complete unknown to me. This is the 12th hand in my life that I've played with them. The small blind is a really good, really like top level, very successful pro on ACR, and the button is a bit of a fish. Like a calling station, very rarely raises. In fact, I have 242 hands and they've never 3-bet in like 0% 3-bet. So this is like, and they have they're a V-pipping and they're like a 36-16. So they're just like a really passive player. So, okay. So we now know that button kind of passive fish, small blind really good, big blind unknown. We bet out the button, maybe predictably calls, and the small blind folds, and the big blind check raises to 14 big blinds. Back to me and my I told you I butchered this hand, so I don't think I probably did this right. But what would well, I'll just tell you what I did. I called, and I didn't really take the button very seriously here. I think if the button had flatted me, I'd feel like my hand is just gold. But when I get check raised here, I maybe can find this fold, but I don't know. I don't know if I can. So I call here. That may be the beginning of my unraveling.
So this is not this exact spot, but these types of situations come up a lot when I'm working with students. And one of the first questions I ask is when they check raise, like, how do you picture, like, what do you envision his entire check raise range as being in that spot, and error on the side of being too inclusive?
To me, it's especially against an unknown on ACR, I think I have to give them all the sets. I have to give them like pair plus straight and flush draws. So they probably have like a lot of like 7-6s and 5-6s and some of those kinds of hands. They're going to have a lot of, I think they're going to have some kind of weird like A7 type hands. Those are going to be their bluffs that they like get a little, it depends if they're bad or they're like a little sticky. They're like frustrated that they're like that king came and they're just that there's that kind of emotional attachment to the, but I just had top pair. So I think that's going to be in there in some level. They're going to have, they're the big blind. So they're going to have some straights. They're going to have 4-6 a little bit. And they're gonna have some 2-pair. I mean, they're gonna have a decent number of 2-pair as well.
Yeah, so I definitely think all of the value hands you mentioned are going to be in there. When you talk about a hand like A7, and this is kind of a weird concept, but I think what you have to do with a hand like A7 is you have to look at it as a small partial frequency. In other words, there is going to be a percentage of the population that will take a hand like that and frustration bluff, but it's not going to be 100% of the population, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be, in my mind, that's like 5%. Maybe I'm being a little too tight. Maybe it's closer to 10 or 15, but it's not going to be the entire population. And so as you kind of describe that range, it's weighed very heavily towards value. Yeah. Which means that in turn, calling gets less and less profitable. The other two dynamics here are his sizing. He only went to 14 bigs, which sounds like a lot, but remember, it's 4 big blinds, a 4 big blind call, and then a 14 big blind check raise from out of position. It's honestly an undersized check raise at that point. And it's not one that's necessarily going to get through 2 people very often. So it's not exactly the kind of check. Like if someone has ace 7, a lot of times they're going to be like all in, or they're going to like go huge because they're frustrated. They're trying to make a point and they're trying to push you out of they don't want to call, right? That bet is kind of inviting a call. The third thing is like you have the player behind you. So when he goes to 14 and you call for an additional 10, now there is 28, 38.5, 42.5 in the pot, and it's 10 to call for the button to get to 42. He doesn't even have to have that great of a hand from an equity standpoint to justify a lot of calls. So to me in this spot, I think you have two options, and neither of them are call, unfortunately. I think it's you either have to jam to push the button out if you think that the big blind has a sizable amount of bluffs, or you have to fold. Yep. Calling becomes a problem because again, it's the small bet on the flop principle in reverse. When you call, you especially with the player type you mentioned, he's never going to fold. So you're actually giving yourself negative equity because you're letting him in. And in addition to that, now we have a very inflated pot where it's almost going to be impossible for you to know where you're on river, because what river card outside of an ace or a king, and even then, are you really going to feel that excited about? I mean, if a king comes on the river, awesome, you've got trips, all the sets are still out there, right? So it's not like there's any card that can come on the river where you're dancing. So I think you have to shove or fold, and I'm in this situation personally going to lead very heavily towards fold because I think that bet is a very inviting check raise. And I just don't think there's very many players that are capable of check raising to that size with anywhere near kind of a proper range they would to give us, a profitable call in that spot.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think this was definitely. I think this was a fold at this spot. But we do make the call, and surprisingly, the button folds. So we go heads up to a river, and the 10 of hearts comes. So our final board is 7 of spades, 3 of clubs, 5 of hearts, king of clubs, 10 of hearts. We have 44 big blinds behind, and the big blind shoves.
Yeah, I mean it's and this is the nature of calling, right? Because if you're calling on the turn, you're calling because you think that he has a proper amount of bluffs. So at this point, it's like if you think he has a proper amount of bluffs on turn, nothing's changed. You have to think he has a proper amount of bluffs on river. So it's, I mean, I don't see. I wouldn't have called on turn, but once you call on turn, it's kind of like you kind of have to go with your original read at that point. Otherwise, you're just lighting money on fire twice. So I don't like the call on the river because I don't like the call on the turn. But once you get here, I think if your read is, I think he's capable. This, a lot of draws bricked out. The flush draws bricked out. The straight draws bricked out. This isn't really a card that completes many two pairs. You kind of have to finish lighting the money on
fire. I feel you on this one, Chris, because I've been in this spot before where it almost feels like you have such a good hand that you don't want to fold. I'm talking like on the flop when you get check raised because you see the king and it's like, oh yeah, I got ace king, right? King on the turn, awesome. And then you get check raised and then all of a sudden you're like, no, I'm not feeling so good about this anymore. And now I don't know. And that's why I like Rob's point of just, if we're going to go for it, just go for it, rip the Band-Aid off. If he has us, he has us. And if he wants to call with some weird 7 or whatever he's got, then let's get the money in. Or if he's just going to fold, then awesome. So,
yeah, I think one thing too with smaller check raises, I don't know about you guys. I've always struggled with small check raises because I feel like I get this thought of like, oh, I can't let him get away with this. Like, what if he clicks me back, right? And he's just doing it as a bluff. But you have to understand, out of position, multi-way pot. The last thing he wants with any of his bluffs are calls. Right. So, like, nobody is, like, in the big blind, like, oh, I'm going to make a small check raise here into, like, all of these people. And then if I do it into all these people, they're just all going to fold and I'm just going to print and I don't have to worry about when someone calls because it's never going to happen. And now I have a bigger pot on turn and I'm still out of position. That's not a worry. Like, it's just not something that happens very often. So like, it sucks. It really sucks when you get that small check raise and you have a strong hand, but you just have to understand it's like from the dynamics, especially with what's going on the button, the player is either like just doing it with pure value, or if they're really good, they're not going to do that sizing anyway because they know the button's going to call too. So
right.
It's annoying.
Yeah, and I mean, I ultimately did decide that, like, kind of like the narrative that you described is just like, well, all those pair plus straight draws, pair plus flush draws, all they just all bricked out. And if I called that turn, I can't fold this river because this is such a big this is a get out of my pot kind of sizing. It's an overbet. So I think the mistake was on that turn. I'm curious, when you decided to call turn, did you decide in advance when you were going to call the turn that you were going to call any brick river? Like, was that a part of? Yes. I mean, yes, I was. Not a lot of people do that. So it's good to hear. I was, I mean, I would have been, if a club came or sure, a really straightening card came, I would have been a lot less happy about this, but the 10 of hearts is about as bricky as it gets here. So I called and they flopped it straight. They had 4-6 of hearts.
Of course they did.
But I think it's a really good, lesson in terms of the multi-way-ness of this pot. And I think that the fact that there were all these players in this pot, that once we got check raised, we have to remember that the big blind is doing that not just to us, but to all these other players as well. And so I think it's a turn I needed to let go of, I think. And I would definitely note that player is probably a good thinking player, because not a lot of players are going to have the stones to check the nuts twice. Yeah. In that spot. So, and that's where, playing an AACR 55, you just have to be cognizant that even when you don't know people at the table, I mean, in this day and age, there's a lot of people that are still playing on multiple accounts and do it. There's a lot of shenanigans. It's just the reality of the situation. So you have to, in those stakes, you definitely have to give players a little bit more credit and lean towards people being good, even if you don't have, that sample info. So right.
That actually brings up a question that I had listening to you guys talking about this, Anne. So last week we talked about scenarios or circumstances that you might choose to go multi-way, or you might choose to try and go heads up, hand characteristics, stack sizes, position, a lot of good things that were covered there. What about player types? So it seems like, obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious. It seems like if you're considering going multi-way, you would prefer to do it with passive players and not with aggressive players. I mean, none of us want to play with good players if we can avoid it. We should all just be game selecting, so we're only playing with players that are not as good as us. That's a general rule. But is it as simple as skewing towards a more passive table? Like it's okay to go multi-way on a passive table more often, or is that just the kind of heuristic or general rule that we want to avoid?
I think it's a good rule of thumb. I mean, one of the most extreme examples is a hand like Ace King suited. People would think it was blasphemy to, not 3-bet Ace King suited in a multi-way pot. But again, let's just take it to an extreme situation. There's, 5 limpers, and that the small blind and big blind are people who will literally put 200 big blinds in the pot with top pair. Do you really want to scare out their 8-7 offsuit or their 5-6 offsuit or their 9 deuce suited? It's one of those things where there are a lot of situations where there are multiple profitable avenues. And the art and the beauty and the creativity of poker is understanding that and being able to figure out which of those profitable scenarios is the nut profitable scenario for a specific situation. And that's why there's virtually no strategy in poker that you can say is bad 100% of the time, because there's always going to be a situation where it's not bad. right? Jamming 200 big blinds pre-flop with pocket aces. Oh, it's the worst thing you could do. Well, if you have a guy at the table who just wants to double up no matter what and will never, ever, ever, ever fold any 2 cards there, it's now a really good strategy. So I don't very often flat ace king suited pre. I usually like to put that into my value 3-bet range. But the combination of passivity with, I think, the other important factor in that is how poorly do they stack off, because that really increases your implied odds. Those 2 things combined will definitely steer you in that direction. We all talk about sets and how, like, you'll hear 10-1, you'll hear 12-1, you'll hear kind of some different numbers flown out for what you need for implied odds to set mine. And the reason those numbers vary is because it's subjective based on, we know we're going to flop a set, 1 in 6 times is great. How often are we going to get paid off when we actually flop that set? That's the part of the equation we don't know. And so, yeah, passivity is great because we don't want to get squeezed when we come along for the ride. But then in 2, you need people that are willing to stack off. I learned this in cash games the hard way because I'd get in these cash games and everybody's being passive and I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm going to see cheap flops. And then, like, I'd get in spots where I would bet flop, turn, and river with a set. And the guy would call the river with the second nut flush and not raise. And I'm like, I'm never going to double up in this game. If you will not raise with the literal second nuts, you're never getting it in, ever, unless I'm beat. And in those situations, now, even if they're passive, it doesn't help as much because, like, part of the implied odds of being in a multi-way pot is really being able to double up. And that's why we do it when we're deep, because we're really looking, to win a 200 big blind pot early in a tournament and give us that stack that we can leverage heading into the money bubble.
Yep,
Every time I hear that 2007 Poker Stars It's Your Turn noise, the hair on the back of my neck stands on end, and I'm like, oh, I want it back so bad. Oh.
That's great. Yeah. So, Rob, we're playing, as we sometimes do on these forums edition of the podcast, that we record these on Monday nights, which is also when our Tournament of Champions is running. Humble brag, I'm playing in the Tournament of Champions this month. And
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
I've seen you play. I'm not surprised.
The rest
Rob
of us are very surprised. Let me tell you.
Yeah, they know me a lot better.
Surprised.
They know me a lot better than you do, Rob. But thank you for the kind words. And thank you for joining us for another edition of the Rec Poker Podcast. I swear, we lose track of time on here, but holy Lord, it's been here quite a while. You're one of my favorite people to talk poker with. I'm so glad that you're having all this fun and success, shining the light and helping people get more into this game and spreading your love for the game. Why don't you just tell our audience one more time where they can get a hold of you and how they can tune in for more of the fun that you're bringing to this great game of poker?
Yeah, so they can head over to 100kstudios.tv is the website. You can check out my stream at twitch.tv/pokerpastor, or you can follow me on Twitter at Rob Gardner Live. And listen, I am not Norman Chad, but I do have one of his starbursts, and it's still,
yes.
I have it. So anytime you guys want to do this, you just let me know. I will be happy to come on as much as you will put up with me.
Right on, Rob. Well, you heard it here, folks. Rec Poker Nation, you might be hearing a little more from Rob Gardner over the next little while if we have our way. All right, well, then, without further ado, I have to thank the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, Ben Enslow, Rob Washam, Chris Jones, the Wrecking Crew members that were here joining me tonight. Rob Gardner for bringing a lot of fun and some great strategy knowledge into the conversation. All our premium members, thank you so much. And you, the listeners, for tuning in each and every week, twice a week. Holy cow! Couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much.